Okay. As we're collecting the questions, I'm going to start as the moderator. And because we don't have a microphone that we're going to pass around, I'm just going to ask everyone to be very quiet because we're all going to do Q&A without a mic. So the first question, moderator question to our panel is this. Can you see an instance where your position could go too far? What would it look like if your position was taken too far?
Do we have to go up there, or do we speak from...
Let's just all actually talk and see if we can...
Yeah, I don't think...
Yeah, I'll start. I can definitely say that when boycott and protest turns into a goal in and of itself, and when character assassination and personal malice get involved, this is just beyond the boundaries of any kind of construction. Again, this is a tool, and this is an effective tool. Sometimes we have to have force. But when we start getting into personal character assassination, and this really turns me off.
And I think the same thing for... Okay, go ahead, clap. The same thing for engagement. If you're going to meetings for the sake of being at the meeting, if you're not doing your homework and understanding that there are... And another thing I think is important for us to understand, people make mistakes. There are mistakes that are made when you are trying to engage. There are mistakes that are made when you're trying to convey what you're doing to your constituency and to the public. So there are mistakes, and the best thing to do is to rectify those mistakes immediately, and when they're not, then that just adds to the people's confusion over what you're trying to do. So engagement, just like Abbas said, as far as protest, is not for the sake of being at a meeting. You're responsible when you're in the meeting for making sure you're advocating for the interests of the organization, number one. And that organization should be representing the interests of the community. So I think that's one thing where you go too far in terms of engagement.
And I think to add on to that, I think the moment somebody walks into the room, whether it's sitting at a table with Zionists, whether it's sitting at a table with the president, wherever you're sitting, the moment someone loses their sense of integrity and knowing what we know about people who are suffering, the moment you lose empathy for someone who is suffering is the moment you should pack up and go home. You should not be at the table if you cannot bring in your personal integrity.
Can I just say one thing? There was a guy by the name of Abdullah. Oh, sorry.
I think distinguishing between tactics and strategies and having multi-layer tactics and also having short, long, and extended strategy is very important. What I feel is that as a Muslim community in general, we don't have a coherent strategy across the board. And what we have is organizations, each vying for its own agenda, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we don't have a strategy for the whole community. We don't have our platform. What is the Muslim community platform? How do we develop that platform? Where is our political strategy? Where are our political voter registration? So absent this, we begin to, and nothing against, including myself, we begin to fake it, assuming that we have power, we have none. And until we are able to begin to change that, we have still to play in that constructed field.
Okay, the first question, my voice is the only one you're going to hear.
The first question from the field, from the floor rather, is for those who are pro-engagement, is it better to have that engagement at the cost of Muslim unity?
Well, that's assuming there's unity. There is no unity, for various reasons, and also let's not confuse unity with conformity. When unity becomes conformity, you create a culture of intimidation. You try to force others to do things because you believe, maybe in your heart of hearts, probably in your heart of hearts, you believe you have to make non-Muslims Muslims, whatever, and you try to force it. And that creates a culture of intimidation. But we are used to being intimidated by others. We should not get into the point where now Muslims are trying to intimidate others, intimidate each other. So, yes, we want unity, but that means how do we band together with our differences of opinion? And the Quran says the enemies of Islam are banding together. Unless you band together, corruption and tyranny will spread. We have to band together. And that means by managing differences of opinion.
Oh.
And so to echo onto that, I think our unity comes around our shared principles. What are those shared principles? Those are things like justice. Those are things like standing up against oppression. Those are really broad terms where our unity doesn't come around strategies and tactics. The Prophet and his companions, peace be upon all of them, did not have unity around strategies and tactics. They weren't a single issue society. We are the most diverse religious faith community in the world. We are not a single issue ummah. We have lots of different issues. I'm from the south side of Chicago. There are things I care about in the south side of Chicago. I'm not going to shoot myself in the foot on one issue so I can't speak up on the other issue.
So another question is for Hatem and Abbas. Given the impasse between you and the other side,
You speak on the mic so people.
I guess I'm the softest one.
Yeah.
Okay. Given the impasse, so this is for Hatem and Abbas, given the impasse between you and the other point of view, where do we go from here?
I don't think, this setup really represents what can be accomplished, all right? There is an impasse over what is a pretty small problem, all right? And the scope of things, in the scope of the problems that we are confronted with and have the capability to solve. I need Summer at the Accelerator at University of Chicago. I need Salam at MPAC. I need all of these people. I need Imam and Tepli, all right? We all need each other. And so the impasse that we think is there is one that is a problem that we will grow through. And so if we can put these differences to rest, this program to rest, I think that we can move forward and have a very, very strengthened community as we grow.
I'm going to, of course, go ahead. I'm just standing here to get ready for this.
I think the issue is not about whether we reach impasse or not. I think the issue is that what are the American Muslim principles in engaging politically with our government that is today is the primary violator of our civil and human rights here and violating the civil and human rights of Muslims across the world. I cannot be fully conscious as an American knowing that my government have drones that are killing people on a daily basis. My tax money is going to fund that enterprise. For me, that's the issue that we need to discuss. What are the principles? What are the modes of engagement? And how we could bring change to that. And I think once we think of those principles, we could move beyond the current impacts.
Can I respond to that? And I actually absolutely agree with both of you. I think the only other thing is that we have issues in this world. We see the issue with the Syrian refugee crisis right now. If we don't have the ability to have conversation with power, we can't ask our government to take in refugees. We can't demand that of them if we don't know them. And if we don't have the ability, if we don't have the Andre Carsons and the Keith Ellisons, and if we don't have more of them, how are we going to ask them to do that? And secondly, to your point, I actually agree with everything you said. But having said that, is when we're talking about Palestinian suffering, let's do something about that. Let's not put all of our energy into wasting our time talking about 50 people who went on this program. Do something about it. I want you to do your work, and similarly. And I think we all need to do our part.
Okay, another question. When it comes to either boycott or engagement, how is the American Muslim establishment deciding who or what to rise up against? We mentioned MLI, CDE, and the White House of Thug, but where are the condemnations of Saudi Arabia and Yemen? and solidarity with Black Lives Matter or being outspoken against poverty?
Well, I'll speak for myself. I'm an equal opportunity guy. I boycotted and work against almost every cause that is there. So Black Lives Matter, we're there engaged with them, and we have a solidarity between Palestinians and African American community. What I don't want is to try to use the existing disparity relative to African Americans to use it against the Palestinians. And I wrote a letter last year where somebody says we can't engage in Palestine because we want to engage with our African American brother, and said don't be doubly racist by using the suffering of African Americans to silence Palestinians and then to create tension between Palestinians and African Americans. We need to dispense with this attempt to try to create layers of lack of engagement on the African Americans, on the Latinos, on Asian Americans. And where are the interfaith dialogue with African Americans churches? Where the interfaith dialogue with the Latinos on the borders? Where the interfaith dialogue with Asian Americans? Where is the interfaith dialogue with the Japanese? It seems that the only way we're stuck is interfaith with our counterpart in the Jewish community, and that's what we're concerned about.
I kind of want to bring the academic hat in on that question about who gets to decide. The fact that we don't have representative institutions in our community, in the country, it tells us something about the way issues come to float. I am completely sad and dismayed that we have spent so much time talking about certain kinds of programs as opposed to the refugee crisis. And I think really what that's indicative of is how shell-shocked we really are as a we, all right? And I think that we simply have overlooked how powerful we really can be as individuals and as a community. And so even though these identity politics rise to the surface, I want us to realize that that's an indication of a kind of structural weakness. And if we can attack that structural weakness, and those at the leadership, if we can open up viable paths for problem solving on the refugee crisis, okay, Summer, you're at an accelerator. Give me a social entrepreneurship model that we can expand through the vast network of Muslim NGOs that we have. I'm working with all those NGOs. Let's make a commitment to make that happen. I think if we open up those paths, the community will start to strengthen itself and show its potential.
Okay, before people start to leave, I just want to make one quick announcement, which is to evaluate the session on the ISNA app. Please do that. We're very interested in what you think. There are a few questions that really ask about, is this a false dichotomy? Are there times for engagement and times for boycott? And if the panelists could mention, if that's the case, what would be the time for each? Is it a false dichotomy? Do we do both?
I'm of the position you have to do both, but there has to be a very completely strategy. So I want those who are engaged to actually praise those who are engaged in boycott, and not to really see it as a mutually exclusive strategy. For the engagement is to have a comprehensive engagement. So to have engagement of voter registration, of voter participation, engaging with civil rights organizations that have been very critical of various pieces. So when we go and speak, we're speaking in a louder voice and a larger voice, and everybody is engaged within that process.
So, just to build on these points, number one, to the previous question, there is no such thing as an American Muslim establishment. It just doesn't exist. There are organizations that are trying to do the best they can with the situations at hand. And you guys, we all have to understand that the issues that are before us are enormous. There are the Syrian refugee crisis, the Palestinian issue, genocide of the Muslims in Myanmar and the Central African Republic, what's happening in Kashmir, what's happening in Chechnya, all of these issues, what's happening here in the United States in terms of our civil rights. These are enormous issues, and they are complex issues. So to come and give us this simplistic either this or that, I agree, it's a false dichotomy. And I agree with Hatem also. We, as leaders of organizations, representatives of organizations, have to come to the table and develop comprehensive strategies on these issues. We have not done that yet. And until we do, then all this talk and social media and back and forth that's going to be, unfortunately, sucking and consuming our time. So if we want to have achieve anything on this issue of reforming national security policies vis-a-vis CVE, there should be a strategy meeting on that. If we want to deal with the Palestinian issue and how boycott versus engagement is impacting that, we need to have a strategy meeting on that. Until we do our homework, I just want to tell everybody, you know what? I don't want to hear it. Do your work, I'll do my work, and let's see whatever we can do together, let's do it together. If not, let's just pray for each other. And as the Prophet was advised in the Quran, when the Muslims violated his order in Uhud, what did they tell the Prophet? Go and treat them softly. Do not be harsh on them. And seek their advice. Consult with them. So in other words, do not disenfranchise them. I'm worried that our children are going to go ahead and do things without us because they're trying to stay away from all this bickering and infighting. And we're going to lose them in the process. So our job to work together to coalesce on common ground is critical. Sorry.
Just really quickly, I think I agree with what's been said already. I think that both boycott and engagement are not mutually exclusive. There's a push and pull that needs to happen. And I think what's interesting, I think we're hitting on a really important point to go back to that academic point, which is we need shared principles. We need to know what our core issues are as American Muslims, and then we can differ. It's okay to actually have different strategies and tactics. You can approach a problem, a lot to learn from Steve Jobs. There's a lot to learn from people who understood that this is what I'm doing, and there are 10 different approaches on how to get there.
Very quickly. Very quickly, I on the notion of strategy, shared principles, and kind of general approach, I would encourage everybody in this room to download the RAND report, Building Moderate Muslim Networks. All right, if you're not familiar with this report, I think you need to become familiar with it. There is a logic behind the way our institutions are moving, and I think a general cornerstone of our strategy will be to how do we relate to the goals of this report, because state institutions and our institutions are all moving in that direction. So let us have a framework. Let's have a conversation about the RAND report and how our activity relates to the RAND report 10 years later.
We will have to leave it there. We are unfortunately out of time. If you want more information about ISPU, please check out our table outside. And we want to emphasize that our goal today was not to come to consensus. It was to walk away with a deeper, more nuanced understanding of both sides. So I thank you for your time, and we look forward to next year's debate.